We have John Wilmoth back with us. He's the director of the Population Division at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. John, thanks for joining us again. This is, of course, the world's Sunday marked World Population Day. The focus was on human rights and reproductive health. Practically, how did that focus play out?
Well, we have this interesting situation now where we've got one group of countries that are growing very rapidly, and their populations are relatively young, and another group of countries that are growing much more slowly, if at all, and whose populations are much older. And all of these countries, broadly speaking, are going through a similar process of the demographic transition, which is the shift toward longer lives and smaller families, which has been observed throughout the world. And but in this situation, we think about what is it we really need to do. There's concern on the one hand about countries growing very rapidly, concern about other countries growing too slowly or declining in size or growing older. And throughout all of this, I think the key message is that it's very difficult to manipulate those trends. It's very difficult for governments to really foresee what's happening and to decide what's best in terms of the overall aggregate demographic trends. And what's really important is to support people's efforts to have the number of children that they would like to have, and to control the timing of when those births come in. And we found that when people have that opportunity, they typically choose in a rational way, in a way that serves them well and which ultimately serves well the larger good.
Well, I was going to ask you, how does one determine what is the ideal population of the world in terms of sustainability, and how you actually get to those numbers, which I understand that we've passed according to some experts out there. You were suggesting that you can't really force these numbers, but you sort of give guidance and assistance, perhaps education and support. How does the UN do that, and what role?
Well, we do that through various programs, through the United Nations Population Fund, for example, which supports access to family planning and reproductive health services across the world in countries where there is the greatest need, and in other ways that we support people to, as they pursue their life's agenda of deciding how large of a family they want to have and so forth. This comes in through the World Health Organization as well, and other parts of the UN system that support people in their everyday lives in these very crucial moments when you're making decisions about how many children to have and when to have them. So the UN system is very involved in that way. But we also kind of, in the Population Division, which is what I direct, we also pay attention to the larger trends, to the long-term increase of the global population, the long-term aging of the global population. We're very much aware of the fact that these are very powerful trends, and they have implications that the world needs to deal with. But we also kind of see this in some sense as inevitable and irreversible, that it would be very difficult to go backwards. The world is approaching 8 billion people. We anticipate that it will grow to 9, 10, even close to 11 billion people by the end of the century. And we see this as something that is really a process that is already in motion, and it would be very difficult to reverse. And we believe that the most important thing to do is to anticipate these changes and to plan for them. And this involves both the growth, the continued growth of the human population, but also the continued aging of the population.
I want to get into the economic ramifications, not just of that growth, but of also the declines that we've seen, some of them because of COVID, and perhaps a longer impact of that, and what areas of the world that most affects.
Well, it's a complicated story, and I would say the evidence is just coming in. So I really hesitate to generalize about regions of the world where this is happening or that is happening. I can only tell you what we've observed so far for selected countries where we have data. So I have to qualify any summary that I would provide. But certainly in parts of Central and Southern Europe and Europe in general and North America, we've seen a tendency toward lower levels of fertility during the pandemic, where possibly people are being discouraged from having children because of the uncertainties of life. And this is places where people can control fertility very well, where they have good access to reproductive health services and family planning. In some other parts of the world, there was concern that the effect might actually be the opposite. The effect of the pandemic might be that people would end up having more children than they were planning to have because possibly with the pandemic, there would be disruptions of contraceptive supply lines. And we have seen some evidence of this in some parts of the world, and Central and Southern Asia and Northern Africa and Western Asia. There are some examples of this. I won't say it's across those regions, but there are some examples in those areas. In other parts of the world, though, we've seen, where you might expect that this would be a problem, we've seen that because of the efforts of organizations like the UNFPA and other non-governmental organizations that have rushed in to try and address this issue, kind of in anticipation that this might be a problem, they've tried to react, and they've been successful in some areas. And it appears that there hasn't been the increase in fertility that we maybe feared because of the breakdown of contraceptive supply lines. So it's a complicated story, and I guess the big picture on this is that we do anticipate some impacts of the pandemic on fertility, but overall we anticipate that they will be temporary, and that it doesn't really change our long-term perspective on the future trends of the human population. It's probably a temporary effect. We know this partly from history and partly just from observing what's going on now, and we've consulted with the experts, and we will continue to consult with the experts to keep up to date on this, but that's our view right now of how it's going.
All right, John Wilmoth from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, thank you so much for joining us.